Good evening. My reading response for the reading assignment for this week is I feel very informed. I feel like there's a lot of material in these four chapters. The one thing that stands out for me is creating an environment in which where it's conducive to learning, and that's from being tuned in to the students that you teach. Um, there was a lot of technical talk, you know, collaborative consultation, co-teaching, and order team or other team arrangements, curricula and instructional strategies, accommodations, and adaptations. Wow, that's a lot of stuff um, to take in. The encouraging side of it is that it's a framework. The reading, the information that I'm learning, it helps me understand that there's a framework. And a framework means that you have a better chance of success. When I look at all the technical terms especially in chapter 2, when you are talking about collaborative consultation, co-teaching, curricula, and instructional strategies, these plans of how to do things great for kids who have exceptionalities is encouraging. It makes me feel like I'm becoming an expert in special education, and that special education is not something that is just set to the side down the hall or upstairs or wherever, but it is an area of expertise. That's what I am learning in the reading that I have taken in. Um, the expectations for special educators is as it is for all educators, and that is that this is not a field of study for those who can't teach, and so they go into special ed, which is what I used to think, but I don't think that anymore. I think that it takes a special person, special education, to go into a classroom knowing that there are students of different abilities and being able to reach all of the students in different ways if it's necessary. What I love about what I am learning is that every child is targeted for a great education, at least theoretically. I don't know how well in practice it works, but I'm happy to see that there are standards that we as educators have to adhere to. There are laws that we have to be familiar with. There are procedures that we have to follow. We can't just get in there and willy nilly do our thing. And that's good, like universal design and universal design for learning. It's encouraging to know that there is a design, there is a plan for excellent teaching. And it's also uh, encouraging to know that there are research based strategies for teaching children with exceptionalities. What I also love about it is that where possible, the goal is for children with exceptionalities to spend as much time as they can in the general education population to build relationships with people who don't have disabilities, which helps them to feel included and normal. Now, what jumped out about the reading to me, and I couldn't wait to get to chapter 3, was the chapter on cultural diversity. Is it in special ed? Now, funny enough, it was the chapter that I loved the most, but I could not do the quiz at the end. It took me 8 attempts to do it because I was determined that I was going to get them all right. Multicultural and bilingual aspects of special education. Um, I was happy to read about the myths and the misconceptions, but it's also honest and says that there is bias. And sometimes students do get um, misdiagnosed or I don't want to say categorized, but there is bias. out there. And there's a lot of talk in this chapter about how teachers need to overcome their own biases and strive to do what's best for the student and just view them as a student who needs to be assessed, and not look at their cultural background, their their um, their inability perhaps to speak English, or just the differences that their value differences. And it seems in a way that, having read through this in this chapter, there are always going to be teachers who subject kids to their own standards and values, and so there's going to be bias. I think that's impossible. It'll never there. But at least if we have standards that we know that we should be adhering to, then the likelihood of people treating students in a biased way can be minimized, because there are standards now in place so that we can um, not have that happen as much as it perhaps has happened in the past. Um, my own personal experience with ethnicity and exceptionality, this is in, I guess, in special ed and with me, it is going to come up from time to time. And being a Black person, having been raised in this country, in an educational system that was very much biased against people like me, sometimes subtly and sometimes not so subtly. Um, it's sad sometimes to see that it's still going on, just not as blatantly as it used to go on. But it's still sad to see that Black children are still disproportionately represented in special ed. It's also sad to realize and learn, because I did look it up online, and that is that often kids who are in special ed are kids who end up in trouble. And in one of the documentaries that I researched, it says that some states um, figure out the size of their prisons based looking at third and fourth graders in their school districts. Now, I think that's very sad, and that's very, very telling. And so I was, intrigued by what I read about ethnicity and exceptionality. It sounds really good, especially if you come from a background where you have a two-parent family, although not always, where you have economic security, although not always, and that you have, a good support system that you can really overcome some difficulties in terms of learning difficulties. But if you are impoverished, a person of color, and maybe in a single parent family, it could be like a spinning of a or a throw of the dice, how your experience in school goes. And so I am encouraged that there are standards that we are supposed to stick to, and I hope that I do. And I want to keep going, even though I find it's very difficult to hold all this information in and then talk about it in an educated way. But that's my honest response. I mean, there's a lot to take in. Sometimes it this week I think it feels a bit overwhelming to look at all of this information and talk about it in an educated way.